Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
Our guest today is Carl POTTS, who's been a longtime editor at Marvel. He was the creator of Alien Legion and many other outstanding titles. In fact, Carl created the Epic imprint, which held sway at Marvel in the 80s, where creators were invited to submit their own creator-owned books to the title. And a number of creators responded with some of their best work. Unfortunately, Marvel no longer welcomes creator-owned books. But Carl's tenure was marked by outstanding storytelling. I remember when he asked me to write The Punisher, he said, the one thing I require is that your stories make sense and that they be grounded in the real world. Carl was also a very talented illustrator who has illustrated several graphic novels, including the one about the dragon. What's that called, Carl?
Last of the Dragons.
The Last of the Dragons. And since leaving Marvel, Carl has joined the world of academe, and I believe he's teaching. Where are you teaching, and what are you teaching?
I teach at several schools. Most of my work is at the School of Visual Arts in New York. I teach both in person and online for them. And I also teach online for Academy of Art University, which is based out on the West Coast. And occasionally I'll do classes at Pace University, Manhattanville College. And I sometimes get asked to give my presentation on sequential visual storytelling at a variety of colleges and companies, including Google New York. I'm actually gave it at MIT, which was very strange. Princeton University, Syracuse. It's strange. When I was in high school, all of my schooling years and through college, saying you were in college was pretty much academic and social suicide. Now, I get asked to speak at MIT and Princeton. It's very strange.
Yeah.
Do you live in New York?
I live north of New York City, yeah. By the way, I need to correct one thing. I did not create the epic line. Archie Goodwin was the guy who started that line. And when Archie left Marvel to go back to DC, I was asked to fill his shoes, which was impossible. But I decided to take it on because I thought there was a good chance that Marvel would just shut the line down unless somebody championed it and took it over. So,
well, all us creators who contributed, thank you. Of course, Archie was one of the great editors in comic book, and one of the reasons he was a great editor was because he was a writer first, and he understood the business, and he understood the mechanics of storytelling, as do you.
Well, thank you. I hope I know, at least a small percentage as well as Archie did. Archie was like, for those who, weren't around long enough to know Archie and his work, he was probably the most universally admired and liked writer, editor in the business for decades. And universally, I don't know anybody who's ever had a bad word to say about Archie. Either on the creative side or the editorial side or the personal side.
I recall you telling me one time that you guys would have games of touch football with Archie.
I didn't partake in those, but Archie was an incredible practical joker. There was a period there where, Archie and some of the other editor-writers who would often work late at night on the freelance work at home would come in at, let's say, not normal office hours. And some of the people upstairs at Marvel in the administrative area wanted to enforce more normal office hours. And I think you had to be in by 9:30 or something like that, or get penalized somehow. I don't know what. So that was the stick. The carrot was as if you came in before 9:30, there would be free bagels and cream cheese and all that stuff there. So, and everybody knew Archie, often didn't come in until 10 or so. The first day that was going to happen, I guess it was a Monday morning, they set up the whole bagel thing right outside of his office. And everybody's hoping, Archie's not going to be late and get in trouble. And we're there, putting butter, cream cheese on our bagels and watching the clock. And it goes past 9:30. I think we're sitting there, oh shit, he's going to get in trouble. And right after 9:30, the office door, Archie's office door opens, and he yawns and stretches in his pajamas in the doorway. He got in super early that day just to pull that joke off. That's the kind of guy he was.
And anybody who's interested in Archie's writing, I would recommend the Manhunter book he did with Walt Simonson.
Classic stuff. That was just, I remember when that first started being serialized in it was like a giant sized dollar book or something DC was doing. They were having a lot of reprints in the back of that thing. And they had like one new Batman story and then the Manhunter backup. And I paid whatever the outrageous amount of money was for that thing, just for that Manhunter backup every month.
Wow.
It was great.
Now, Carl, you started out as an artist.
Yeah.
Do you still draw?
Yeah, but I don't draw a lot of finished work anymore. There's just no time. Most of what I'm doing is demonstrating for students or doing overlays on their work or do roughs here and there. The last bit of work I did artwork-wise that was published by a major company was probably a year and a half, 2 years ago now, maybe. Yeah, the pandemic time thing has me all screwed up. But I did that when Marvel did Marvel Comics 1000 and then 1001. They had a bunch of people do one page that had worked at Marvel, and they asked me to do a single page. So I wrote, penciled and inked a single page of the alternate origin of Peter Parker that went with a what if story I'd written shortly before that on what if Peter Parker had become the Punisher. They presented me with this concept and asked me to write a story around it. So I came up with the idea that in this alternate universe that the spider that bit Peter in that radioactive lab was a thing called a false widow spider, which is I think in the UK and Europe. And it's toxic, and on the back of the abdomen it has these markings that often look remarkably like a skull. And so I have that be the spider that gets irradiated and bites Peter, and that with the toxic effect alters his personality a bit than it normally would have been, making him much more violent prone for a while anyhow.
That's
so
cool.
I have follow-up story ideas for that if Marvel ever decides they want to do that. I've put that bug in their ear.
You must have heard of Jerry Conway's recent comments regarding the Punisher.
I haven't read them, so I don't know for sure. But I know there's been a controversy about the character's popularity in certain ways and all that. And I actually agree with some of the problems. I do not think the police should be using the Punisher icon. The last thing I want my police to identify with is with a violent vigilante. The police are supposed to be part of the balance of power, enforcing, not to be judge, jury, and executioner. And the last thing I want to see is my police cars driving around with a skull emblem on it. I'm also, even though it's probably not quite as bad of an objection, I don't think the military should be using it. That skull emblem, strictly related to the military, its biggest connection would be with the SS, and I don't want our soldiers being associated with the SS. And, a big part of what helped win the peace in World War II was GIs being generous with the locals, with their, handing out Hershey bars and Spam and all that. And, the idea of some GI trying to be nice and hand out to kids, wearing a skull, it irks me. I don't know if we ever talked about it this detailed on Mike, but my take on the character was that he was an obsessed individual who his family had been rubbed out by the mob, and he felt extreme guilt for not having protected his family. So he had this sort of death wish, and he took on not just the people who were immediately responsible for his family's death, but he kept taking on more violent criminals. And he took no satisfaction in it. He never like kicked back with a beer after a mission accomplished and, felt accomplished or anything like that. It was just on to the next one, on to the next one. And at some point, he'd be killed or maimed and be rewarded for what he should have been rewarded with for failing to protect his family. And he usually denied himself any personal interactions with others, because on the few times he would do that, inevitably they would meet a horrible fate because their association with him. And it was like a cathartic, ride for viewers, because the character got to do things that we can't do in real life, which is, go after some of these violent criminals that somehow escape the justice system and things like that. Never thought that anybody should ever emulate this character in a way, shape, or form, any more than I thought a kid should, tie a towel around their neck and jump off the roof and think they're Superman. But once in a blue moon, I'd get a letter from someone saying, "Oh, I love the Punisher. I want to be just like him." And I'd roll my eyes, and I'd stop whatever they're doing. I'd write them back and explain to them that this is a miserable human being who hardly ever solves any problems. More often than not, he just gets involved with or perpetuates or starts ongoing cycles of violence. He takes no joy in life. Anybody he gets close to is usually not long for this world. Why on earth would you ever want to be like this character? And what worried me is that, for every person that wrote in that said something like that, how many others had a similar feeling but did not bother to write in. Right. So that's one of the reasons I tried to make the books, anything I wrote or drew or edited, I tried to make sure they didn't glorify or make it seem like this is someone to be emulated. I never had to really talk to you about that, Mike, because that seemed to me you did that naturally. Was that your conscious point of view, or just you had something else going on? Or
well, I viewed the Punisher as a guilt-ridden Catholic, and I felt that he was constantly had this internal struggle between what he was doing and the faith that he wanted to observe, which is why he went to confession all the time.
You're the one who established he had once studied for the priesthood.
Have you seen the Netflix series?
Yeah.
What do you think of that?
I like the actor. I forget his name. Bernthal?
Jon Bernthal.
Yeah.
I like certain aspects of it. They have him do some things, though, that I don't care for. Like when he was guest starring initially, I think in Daredevil, they had a sequence in there where he's running through a hospital blasting away with a shotgun, and the version of the character I would have done wouldn't have done that. And then there's a scene where he's like got Daredevil chained up on a rooftop and interrogating him, and the building superintendent is trying to get up there, and he's on the other side of the door with the Punisher, and the Punisher's got his gun drawn ready to shoot this guy if he insists on coming through the door. And the only reason he doesn't, apparently, is when he finds out that this guy was a former Marine. And I thought, Jesus, so that's what it takes for you to not shoot this guy. That's not the character, I wanted to do. So there are some things like that would bother me. But all in all, I thought it was a really good, interesting show and take on the character. The one of the seasons, the last episode of one of the seasons, where they're reliving what happened at the carousel before got slaughtered. Actually got asked to be an extra on the set there, and I was there all day shooting over and over, but I ended on the digital cutting room floor. I never was in there. And
were they filming in New York?
Yeah, it was supposed to be at the Central Park carousel, but it was some carousel way out in Queens somewhere. And they had they'd put up these magnetic flexible signs that said Central Park Carousel or something on it. And if the wind blew too hard, the corner of the magnetic sign would flip up.
Oh, wow.
And there was a snack hot dog stand there And on the side that was facing the cameras, they changed all the prices to reflect more like a couple of decades ago prices. But if you worked around to the other side, the working side, you could see all the real prices.
That's funny.
It was pretty good.
I do think that the Netflix show was probably the best depiction of the Punisher on film, and that the 3 movies that they made were all misfires for one reason or another. And it stymied me because it seems to me the Punisher is a very easy character to get right.
I agree. Well, you know, it's weird. I do agree, but I also think it's strange because he's basically almost a 2-dimensional character, not a 3-dimensional character.
Right.
And ironically, that's harder to screw up a 2-dimensional character than it is a 3-dimensional character.
Yep.
And I think in the movies, that first one, the original script was much better than what showed up on screen. It was written by Boaz Yakin, who I have a lot of admiration for.
Oh, I know Boaz.
Yeah. And it was rewritten. You know, a new director came in, it was rewritten and all that. And, you know, the idea of Dolph Lundgren just didn't sit with me. And it was filmed, I think, in Australia for budgetary reasons. And you're supposed to be like sitting on a motorcycle on Coney Island and there's palm trees in the background. But it just, the one, I forget the name of the main heavy in there, that actor. He was the only really good one in there. Second one, Thomas Jane, I like him. He's an excellent actor. But that movie made no sense whatsoever.
No, it didn't.
But there's no internal logic in that film. There was problems with that last one too. I like that actor. He was from
Ray Stevenson. I thought he was the best of the Punishers.
He was in Rome, right?
Yes.
Yeah. But it's like, you know, he's living in the subway in this area that you're not supposed to be able to get into, and apparently everybody can walk in there whenever they want.
Yeah.
So, you know, I like stories like Mike said with, you know, strong internal logic that your suspension of disbelief isn't constantly being tested by superfluous bullshit and illogic and so on.
I think that's essential to good storytelling. That you have to draw the reader or the viewer in to a point where he believes utterly what he sees, that if it didn't happen, it could happen. I think that's the key to good storytelling. And my taste in cinema these days is I have to believe that the story could happen, but that leaves room for a huge range of movie types. For instance, Aliens. I love Aliens because I believe it could happen.
Yeah. Aliens is great. Also, the dynamics of the you know, that group cast in there, that ensemble cast is just awesome.
Superb.
Yeah.
Interest in the Punisher remains high. I don't know if you're aware of this, but there are at least 3 Punisher groups on Facebook, and they're all active every day. I don't know if you ever check them out, but they're crazy for anything Punisher, and they're all weighing the latest issue that came out by Jason Aaron.
I haven't read it. I didn't read a lot, but I mean, you probably are aware of this, Mike. I'm not sure if the readers were, but there was a period of time when I was editing the Punisher, and then when I was going to write and do the layouts for Punisher War Journal, Marvel had what is normally a very good policy that if you're a staff editor, you can't edit yourself, which I think is a great policy, except that the only editor that had room in their schedule to take on another book was this editor who I felt should never have been promoted to begin with. I thought he was pretty clueless. And initially, I got no feedback at all from him. So I would give my plots to Ralph Macchio, and Ralph was the uncredited plot editor on those stories for me. He challenged me and give me feedback, and I'd go back and forth with him. And then eventually that editor, who was supposed to be the official editor, decided he needed to earn his pay. So he started making changes for the sake of making changes, and 6 of one, half a dozen the other, if you were lucky, kind of changes, and sometimes detrimental ones. And he didn't have like that point of view I was talking about earlier on the character. He didn't have that nailed down. And there were a lot of people doing a lot of Punisher stories there, and the ones that like Mike and Chuck Dixon, who had a good handle on the character. You know, their stories turned out good, and a few other people, but there were others that he let write things in there that I think really took the character in the wrong direction. He basically took a thriving franchise and drove it into the ground. That's just my slightly subjective point of view.
Was that the editor who took over for you while I was working on the book?
Correct.
I was gonna pull us out of that if we didn't. But I will say, and I feel like that this is kind of what you guys did a little bit. But I do like the fact of like viewing him as kind of like more of like a tragic character and more like almost like a Shakespearean tragedy. But it's almost, and this is one of the things that I got as soon as I heard the music in the show, was it was very cowboy music. So it was very much like kind of like a cowboy story and kind of angle that they were going for, that this, you know, terrible thing happened and then he's going to go get all the people. And at the same time too, I mean, it's kind of in a lot of those stories, it's almost like a death wish. Like he's going to take on, you know, he'd take on a whole army if he had to.
Very much like Death Wish.
It's a cautionary tale about what happens if you let revenge and hate, you know, overtake your life. And that's why I thought it was a cautionary tale, not something to be emulated. So I hear about people thinking they want to emulate that or associate with it. Makes me very, very nervous.
I just think some of the people are just thinking strong. Like, I want to be strong, self-sufficient. They're not thinking the deeper. But this is kind of crazy strong. This is like going off in loony land.
The only time we did at Marvel where we associated with this was the Marvel paintball team. It was the Marvel Punishers. And we would, you know, have like camo versions of the skull on our shirts when we go in there.
I still have the patch you gave me.
Yeah, there's actually two versions of it. The first one was they did wrong. It was a embroidered patch, and they made it 3 teeth, and nobody has a tooth in the middle. So I made them go back and redo it. So the 3-tooth version is very rare. So if you've got that, Mike, you've got a collector's item.
I'll have to go look.
We got noticed enough so that when West Point asked a group of teams that played at this field to come play the cadets at West Point, we got asked along. The first game on purpose, just to unnerve us. You know, it's basically a giant capture the flag thing.
Yeah.
So they didn't even leave anybody at their flag station. They all marched, you know, back or front to back, very close quarters, double time from their end of the field down to our end of the field, took the flag and marched back. Didn't matter how many of them we picked off. They just closed ranks and keep going. And we were just like, holy shit. I remember there was one game where I was the last person on the team left, and all of these cadets are hunting me through the forest. That was one of the most, you know, even though it was paintball, that was the scariest moments I've ever experienced. At one point, I got chased out on this little spit of land into a lake, and there's no place left to go. I got 1 foot in the water and 1 foot on land. There's no place left to go. And I see all this movement in the woods coming at me. And I'm trying to rechange my CO2 pressure real fast. And I just got plastered. But one of the things that was great about playing the cadets is that they were honest, totally honest. Sometimes you play in those public fields, you get people who start walking back to the dead zone after they get with the paint, and they wipe the paint off and they go back. And, these guys, like I would, you know, I'd hear over a bunch of foliage, hear them on the other side, and I can't shoot through it. So I would just mortar a bunch of rounds in the air and come down, and I couldn't see them, but they were taking themselves out if I hit them. The second time we went back there, a lot of the seniors had graduated and been replaced with plebes, and we would get them to break and run from their defensive positions, which was not something you do if you're a cadet. And I'm sure some of those guys are still doing push-ups to atone for that. But it was a lot of fun. I enjoyed that.
Did any of that stuff influence your creation of Alien Legion or anything?
No, Alien Legion got started way before that. When I was in my early 20s and trying to break into comics, I would do like a lot of people do. drop sample pages and send them in and, wait to try and get a response. And usually if you got a response at all, it was a form letter months later. Sometimes I'd write a quick little note at the bottom of it. But I was working on 2 stories at one point. One was sort of an all-human Foreign Legion in space. And another different story was about a couple of aliens that were having a battle, and one of them had this serpentine lower body. And this is an example I tell my students of creativity is often juxtaposing things that you don't normally think of, whether on purpose or accidentally. But I accidentally knocked all the pages for both of these stories off my bed onto the floor, and they all got mixed up. And as I'm starting to sort them out, the light bulb goes off, and I go, why on earth are all of these guys in this spaceborne Foreign Legion humans?
Yeah.
And they should be led by this guy with the serpentine lower body. So that was always knocking around in the back of my head for a long time. I never had time to really do a whole lot with it until I got to Marvel. And even then, I was so busy editing and drawing other things that I ended up teaming up with Alan Zalnitz and Frank Sirocco to bring out that initial series. That's it. I've got
Oh, nice.
a Saragar enamel pen.
Oh, cool.
There, I'm gonna get some more made. If you see me at a convention, come up. I'll give you one.
If it does work out, that would be for a movie and not a TV show. I think it would work great as a TV show, personally. But...
Yeah, it was actually one of the things we did a while ago is we pitched it at one of the major cable companies a while back as a series. I mean, it was built as a series,
right?
So it could go either way. I think it's like, again, I'm just slightly subjective on the subject, but I think it's one of those things that the universe is so big that, and there's so many characters that you could, have any kind of spin-offs and things going on.
Oh, yeah. I did want to ask about this because I swear you guys, they have the best names of the characters in Alien Legion. Were you the one that came up with that, or was that Alan, or a mixture of people?
It was a mixture, yeah. And then Chuck also created a number of characters too as he came on.
Yeah.
But which names stick out to you? Do you recall?
Oh, it just obviously. Let's see. I mean, Jugger does, but like even like Miko, it's like that's perfect for his it fits his character in Saragar, and I just remember like every time that there would be like a new character or a new name or whatever, I was like, where did they come up with these names? Like these names are perfect, and they're not like, because a lot of times it will sound like, oh well, that could be in Star Trek or Star Wars or something, but it's like, man, these sound like these characters. Like this is, I don't know. I was impressed.
Miko, I can't remember. I think that might have been Alan Zalnitz, but another kind of Hollywood side story. There was when it was optioned at Dimension many years ago, they hired a really good writer to write it, but this person had written a bunch of stuff that wasn't science fiction, and I thought he didn't handle science fiction well.
Right.
But he took the name Miko and made it this really badass person. I'm going, that's the word meek is built into the name.
Yeah, that's not his character at all.
He also, created a group of bad guys called the Horde, which had 4 people in it. I've never heard of a Horde with 4 people.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people that are really good writers out there. When you ask them to do science fiction or something fantastic in the fantastic area, they have trouble creating a believable world and making sure they know all the who, what, where, when, why, and how answers to all of the fantastic elements, which I think the writers need to know, even if they don't tell everything to the reader. That confidence that just comes across that they've got their world together just makes the reader feel confident in what they're reading.
Yeah, no, I know exactly what you're talking about, because it's like they have stereotypes in their head, and when they switch to a different genre like that, they start writing towards these like almost like B-movie stereotypes of it's like, no, you have to treat it like it's real. And it's like you don't do that and write corny just because you're not into it.
Right.
Carl, what would you say are the first principles you present to your students who come in and say, well, I want to write a story. What's important? What do I do? What do I have to know?
There's a couple things. First off, I tell them, every writer has to do what works best for them, but often they have to be careful because often what people think works best for them is the easy route, and that's often not the best route. I tell them that there's all different types of narratives, but the classic story arc is the one that is most universally resonates with people, has been since at least the days of, the ancient Greeks. And basically that boils down to having one or more protagonists that have some sort of missing piece or problem, that there's a catalyst incident that propels them into an escalating series of events that eventually lead to a climax where either have learned to fulfill their missing piece or learn something or have an experience where that enables them to either succeed if you want it to be a so-called happy ending, or fail if it's a tragic ending, or have an ironic mixed ending. But that basic arc is at the heart of countless stories. You can do other types of things. You can mood pieces, character sketches, and so on. But if you want to affect the widest possible audience, it should have that classic arc, I think, generally.
So you feel that the protagonist must change during the course of the story?
Or if you're doing a serial like we often do in comics, the illusion of change. Or you reinforce, you test them, and it just reinforces that, yeah, they've got it together in this aspect. You can't have Peter Parker just get wham-whammed, every other issue by some major change. You have to test his dedication to being responsible after all that guilt he had for failing to stop the robber that killed his uncle and so on. Unless you're just trying to do some sort of mood piece or character sketch, which is viable. There's lots of good ones out there. But I think you need to really test your characters and put them through some sort of art. See, I thought I had this down for a long time, and then I wrote this really long graphic novel script based on a couple of screenplays I wrote. It's one Bill Reinhold had been working on a graphic novel for eons now. I don't know if it's going to come out before I die. And it's based somewhat on my mother's family's history during World War II in the Philippines. One part of it deals with a 1st Cavalry Division soldier and the arc he kind of goes through. And I gave it to the editor to read, and I was all proud and happy. I'd been working on this thing for a long time. And he calls me up and he says, I don't really think you push this character enough. He doesn't really go through hell and back. He's just kind of like, he gets his fingers singed. He doesn't really, has to go into the pit with all kind of good. And I was initially kind of a bit righteously indignant. And I go, of course he is. I know what I'm doing. And I sit there and thought about it and go, it is. I like this guy so much. I didn't want to put him through hell. So I went back and I forced myself, and it made it much better story, I think, anyway. But that doesn't mean you can't write a perfectly entertaining and nice story where, your main character, in a way, is sort of a catalyst for other people's arcs. Like, for a long time, I edited the Hulk. You can't really do a hell of an arc with the Hulk, especially when he's the dumb Hulk.
Right.
So basically, he would act like as a catalyst for changes or conflict in the guest star characters' stories or whatever. There are some people who can just come up with a story concept or a character and just sit down and they say, like, let the story write itself. And there are a few people that can actually pull that off, and they'll have a satisfying, entertaining story. But I think the vast majority of people do that are fooling themselves. It usually ends up just like petering out, or if they do, they have to come up with some Deus Ex Machina thing to try and tie it up.
Yep.
So I believe in trying to, for me and for most of my students, I think it's best to combine both that creative instinct with an intellectual approach. I think if for most people, if they do just one or the other, you can end up with that kind of, meandering thing that doesn't pan out if it's just on your creative instinct. But if you do too much of an intellectual approach where you're slavishly following somebody's beat sheet, you can do something that's, crafted beautifully and be totally sterile and lifeless too. So I tell them to come up with their main character and what that character's, where they start out and where you want them to end up, what their goal is, what their problem is, and that they should have some sort of internal conflict, conflicting goals. Know where you want them to start, know where you want them to end up in the general route, just general, and then write the first draft from your gut. Don't think too much about the classic story arc or anything, because that's built into your head mostly anyway from your years of reading and looking at stuff. But write that first draft from your gut. Don't worry about beat sheets. Don't worry about any of that stuff. And then go back and compare what you wrote to a classic story arc, whether it's the writer's journey model or the Save the Cat thing or whatever is popular at the moment, and see where your story diverges and ask yourself as honestly as possible, would my story be better if I did make it adhere more tightly to a classic story arc, or did I come up with something new and different that really works for this particular story? For me anyway, more often than not, I have to say, Jesus, it would be better if I adhere more to the classic story arc. But once in a while, that's not the case. And the only way you'll come across that is if you're not slavish to a beat sheet or an arc in that first draft. You got to be able to write it, from your gut and explore things. An example I use is like, say the character is going to be me. I know me. I'm originally from the San Francisco Bay Area. I decide I'm sick of New York. I'm going to drive across the country and go back to the Bay Area. So I know me. I know my goal. I know where I'm going to go, and I'm going to plan to take Highway 80. It goes right across the country, across the Bay Bridge in San Francisco, right? So I write the first draft, and so it'd be like driving, and I, stop somewhere and meet somebody that I wasn't planning on it and have interaction or an adventure there. I see a sign for, a museum of the world's biggest ball of yarn or whatever the hell it is, and go there and as I'm going near Chicago, I hear on the radio that my favorite all-time band is going to reform for one night only in 4 days. So I end up hanging around Chicago for 4 days and having adventures I didn't plan on. But eventually I keep going back to Highway 80 and going, towards the west. And somewhere along the way, someone says something to me that makes me realize that all the things I like about San Francisco, I like the weather there. Unlike Mark Twain, I like the weather there. I like, the music scene. I like the culture. I love Golden Gate Park. It makes Central Park look like a desert. And I like the fishing. I've got relatives and friends out there. So I'm going to move back there. But as I'm driving across the country, someone makes me remember that I hate those goddamn hills. They drive me nuts. The stop sign is right before the apex. And if you're driving a stick shift, oh my God. And I hate walking them and all that. So all the things I like are further down the coast without those hills in the Carmel, Monterey area and all that. So I end up moving down there. But the only reason I moved down there is because my original target was San Francisco. So everything happens in context to get me to where I'm going. If I just got in my car and started meandering across the country towards the west, I might have an interesting incident or two, but I'd just be meandering around. It wouldn't hold together, and it would probably just fizzle out at some point. So that's why I think it's best to combine that creative instinct with that intellectual approach, at least for most people. But there are always, outliers that can pull things off that I can't comprehend on both the art and the writing side. You guys familiar with the Korean artist Kim Jung-gi?
I am a little bit.
He's the guy that just starts drawing and never lifts his thing from the. Yeah, I've seen him work.
He must be a mutant. I mean, I can't comprehend how he does that, because I thought at first when I saw the videos that he must have blue pencil on the wall that the camera isn't picking up. But I saw him do it live. And there was nothing up there. There's this giant wall, and he'll go over here and do a little bit over here and a little bit up there, a little bit down. And eventually it all comes together in this amazing fisheye perspective that I'm just flabbergasted at. I can't even comprehend pulling that off. So the same thing with writing. There sometimes people can do things in writing, but I think they're pretty rare. So I think that method I just outlined to you probably works the best for most of my students.
For a long time, I would just sit down and wing it. And that's how I wrote comics for 20 years. As you knew, I would sit down and I'd draw the page out on a legal pad, start with the first panel. And I'd think, well, how do I begin this? How do I grab the reader's attention? And then when I had that first panel settled, I'd look at the second panel and ask myself, well, what happens next? What's logical? What continues the story? And it was a very important lesson. And I would encourage anybody who wants to get into comics to try that, because it forces you to think about what happens next. And that's the essential question in all fiction, because the reader has to care about what happens next before he turns the page. And I would just wing it. And I had that classic structure in my head that a story is a dynamic narrative with the beginning, a middle, and an end. And it's like a good pop song in that it's got the tonic, and then it's got the bridge, and then it's got the hook. In other words, the story proceeds like this. Because if the story proceeds like this, it's boring. The reader's not going to be interested. Right. But for the last 20 years, I've become a firm believer in outlines. And now I outline everything, whether it's a novel or a comic book run. But no matter how detailed the outline or how much I love it, invariably I find that when writing the book, those diversions pop up and you veer away from the outline, and it always makes for a better story.
Do you still do thumbnails for everything?
No, I don't. I draw when I have to, when somebody doesn't understand something, like when I'm working with a foreign artist. But otherwise, it's just script style, and I have very terse descriptions in my scripts.
You're the anti-Alan Moore.
Yeah.
You could say that. I'll never forget, I was at Steve Rude's house one day, and he was illustrating a story. I want to make sure I get this right. I don't want to finger the wrong guy. The writer was one of those great artists who did Camelot 2000.
Boland,
yeah.
I don't think it was Brian Boland. I think it was that other guy with the black hair. And Alan Moore worked with him a lot. And anyhow, the dude was working on this story for him. It was a commission from one of the majors. He says, "Do you want to see a piece of shit? Do you want to see a piece of shit?" And he held up this script that was this thick, and he threw it against the wall. The pages went everywhere.
Alan should have learned how to draw so he could just do it all himself.
Yeah. Yeah, there's, and I've seen scripts because a lot of people will, I try not to do this, but I've seen scripts where they put a lot of like links in the script where people can click to follow for references for art. But I mean, I've seen where they have like 200 links like from them to follow on. Like, that's insane.
Yeah.
I do that, but there's maybe 3 links per script.
Right.
It's all for technical stuff, a vehicle or a weapon.
When Mike and I worked together, there were no such thing as links.
Right. Right. Yeah. What's I am curious, because I know in your thing you did like it says in your thing that you've kind of mentored a lot of different artists and stuff, which, I mean, many of them are my favorites. And but I'm curious, like, what kind of different, I don't know, advice and different things did you deal with all them? I mean, I will say, I mean, most of them they definitely kind of developed their own styles and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I like a diversity of styles and approaches, but the constant thing I like is people who are, strong with the visual storytelling. Generally, that's the consistent thing. I like generally clear and compelling visual storytelling. There's sometimes with people that are more design oriented,
right?
And occasionally they'll do things that, on the storytelling side, which will make me go, "Oh my goodness!" But the page just looks so friggin' good that sometimes I'll turn a blind eye to it for at least some aspects of it.
Yeah.
As far as actual styles go, the people I worked with it's quite a range. People would drive me nuts when they say, "Oh, it's there's a Marvel style," and I go, I've got in my office,
Yeah.
I've got Sal Buscema, Jim Lee, Mark Badger, June Brigman.
Larry
Show me where
Stroman.
the Marvel style is and all that stuff.
Yeah.
It was, I think it's just one of those things where it's a convenient thing to say sometimes for people. They didn't really think it through.
Yeah. It's a little bit more.
Not to mention
nowadays.
Mignola was in there too.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Okay, was Larry Stroman one of the ones that had the design stuff that would kind of...
Once in a while, Larry's design stuff.
I mean, I love Larry's stuff.
So do I.
He's very design oriented.
Yeah. Once in a while, the design stuff would overwhelm the clarity of the storytelling, but it was just so friggin' beautiful.
Oh,
He was so into it that, I just sit there and look at the pages and drool. They look great.
Yeah.
One of the things that I ended up doing kind of accidentally was sort of evolving a professional baseball sort of way of dealing with all the new talent. I had my professionals working on the monthly titles. My AAA people were those that I was either giving them like short jobs or fill-in issues or things like that, waiting for their shot at the big time. And then the AA people were those that I thought showed talent but needed a lot of work, and I'd assigned them this 6-page story called Double Vision that Tom DeFalco had written. That was very difficult to fit into the 6 pages. It was very condensed storytelling. You had to really know what you were doing. I still use aspects of that story when I'm working with my students, that just trying to fit all the different pieces of visual storytelling into a condensed amount of space. That's one of the big things I go over with my students, because I'll give them an exercise where I'll give them a short paragraph for an establishing scene. And I'll say, tell this as clearly as possible in the fewest panels possible. And they'll freak out because they got to put all this information in there. And they'll start breaking down each bit of information into its own panel, or maybe they'll combine a couple things in there. And, some will take 7 panels. And I'll show them that it took me a long time to work it out, but I worked it out for 1 panel. The finished thing makes it look easy. It's like it seems self-evident, but I was pounding my head against the wall to come up with this solution over and over again. And that's one of the things, whether you're writing or drawing, visual storytelling, whatever, is that I liken it to being a ballet dancer. A good ballet dancer makes their performance look effortless. You don't see all the practice that went into it. They don't show you that they're landing on a stubbed toe or a twisted ankle or a bad knee. Right. Because if they do, if they start grunting or groaning or limping or whatever, you might have sympathy for them. But they've taken you out of the flow of the story or the narrative or whatever. So if you show you're struggling to tell the story by breaking each little piece down in its own little panel and all that, that affects the reader negatively. Trying to fit a lot of information into a reasonably small amount of space, the reader just picks up on stuff subconsciously that sets them up for what's coming afterwards. And that's not an easy thing to pick up. When I first started professionally, I had no idea what visual storytelling was. I was just, if I drew a figure that I thought came out well, it was going on the panel. It didn't matter if it was what was suited, for it or not. But I got into doing storyboards for New York ad agencies, and that made me have to work fast and tell stories, for 30 seconds very quickly. And I think that was a really good training ground for me.
Something that people, anybody who wants to do comics or any kind of storytelling medium, like you have, and writers too. I mean, a lot of times you have a certain time frame that a story has to be in, or a certain amount of pages or whatever, and it's like you have to learn how to communicate what you're communicating, and it's really hard to do if you don't have any idea of like what the structure is and how to do things like that. I did want to ask, because I heard, and I don't know that he does it every time, but I know Chuck Dixon, and I've done this, and I know other people that have done it too. But I know Chuck Dixon for a while was like, he was always, and I'm sure a lot of it was because of he had, 3 or 4 books coming out a month, and he's just cranking fast. But a lot of times he was writing the beginning and the end, and then he'd fill the middle in later.
Interesting. Well, I think it's, like I mentioned earlier, I think it's important that you know when you start out writing what the beginning is and what you think the ending is going to be. So it keeps you focused, even if you end up, diverting at some point.
There are a handful of novelists who never outlined. Elmore Leonard was one of them.
So he was the Kim Jong-gi of novelists.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Another one is Peter Brandvold, the Western writer. He's probably the most popular Western writer in the world right now. But Peter has an advantage in that each story has the same template, in that it's always a revenge story. And his protagonist comes across an injustice, or an injustice is done to him in the early part, and then the rest of the story is getting even.
Yeah.
And that's what Western fans like.
Yeah, that's something else that I talk to my students about is genre expectations. Like if you're doing a detective novel or something, there's certain things that have to be in there. And as Robert McKee puts it, you have to give them what they expect, but not the way they expect it in order for it to work. Every Western ends with a showdown in a dusty street between the main protagonist and antagonist. It's hard. I can't even name a Western where that doesn't happen. Sometimes there's slight variations, like The Good, Bad, and the Ugly. It's a three-way showdown in a cemetery, right? So not that much difference. But so if you don't do that, the Western fan is going to be pretty unhappy. So your job is to give them what they expect, but not the way they expect it. One of the things I show my students is I show them the climactic scenes for Yojimbo, and then I show them how they got ripped off for A Fistful of Dollars, and how even when you're ripping off someone else's story, if you give it to the audience in a way they don't expect, it's entertaining and it'll work.
Which reminds me of the old axiom: there are only 7 plots in the world that are done over and over again. And I must also point out that Yojimbo was based on Dashiell Hammett's Red Harvest.
For real?
Yeah.
Wow. What year was that written?
Oh, it was in the 30s.
Wow.
Now, you should read it. It's a terrific book.
Huh.
Same plot.
Yeah.
An outsider comes into a town with 2 warring clans, and he plays one against the other to get what he wants.
But they don't always work out when they do. There was that one with Bruce Willis about down in Texas and Mexico or something like that.
Last Man Standing.
That's right. Yeah. You think you'd have all the ingredients there for it, the setting and Bruce Willis. You should have all the ingredients for a memorable film. But
this movie is a gangster remake of Clint Eastwood's A Fistful of Dollars, which is a Western remake of Yojimbo, which is a samurai adaptation of Dashiell Hammett's Red Harvest.
You ever look to see if Dashiell Hammett was influenced by anything?
Plato.
Could have been, but he was kind of an original, and he and Raymond Chandler invented the modern noir detective novel.
The other things I talk to my students about when it comes to writing is that at some point, it can even be after you've completed it, your initial story writing. I think it's good to come up with a thematic statement that you think every element within the story reinforces.
I agree.
And like that one that I'm working on, the World War II one with Bill Reinhold, it's based on a quote that I think it was Churchill's military doctor said, something on the lines of, "War has no power to transform, it merely exaggerates the good and ill that are already within us," which to a certain degree, I agree with, but I still think it's possible to just take, someone who's all goodness and light and just put them through so much crap that they ended up turning toxic. But I get what he's saying, and I think to a large degree, that's what it's about, and that's what the main character in the story goes through. With Alien Legion, it's more along the lines of I'm a big World War II history buff and movie buff, and a lot of family history on both sides of the family there. And so that helped inspire me with Alien Legion, because you had the Western allies. If we conveniently forget we were allied with Stalin,
Yeah.
you had the more democratic, diverse Western allies that, despite their problems, were much more diverse than the xenophobic, fascistic Axis powers. And the Axis powers, Germany had this professional army that they'd been building up for a long time, and Japan had this long military tradition and thought they, were superior, and Mussolini was just trying to tag along, I guess. But they couldn't believe that, an army of citizen soldiers that were made up of all these people, families that had families immigrated not that many generations ago to the U.S., could be molded into an army that could take on these professionals. And, you got units with, a farmer from Texas, and a mechanic from Brooklyn, and a teacher from Philadelphia, and all these guys ended up the crap out of these people. So the basic Alien Legion thematic statement is something along the lines that a diverse, democratic society, despite all the problems that it has, is ultimately stronger than a xenophobic, fascistic society. That's what I think a lot of World War II was about. Again, there's lots of imperfections on the Allied side there.
Right.
Ultimately, I think that's what it comes down to. So Alien Legion, I amped that up by having the most diverse ranks you can have possible, of different cultures and species and all that. Having often where, they don't get along, but they ultimately, that diversity is a strength against the more xenophobic alien foes like the Harkonnens and so on.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you, Carl.
Yeah. Is there specific places you'd like people to follow you online, or where they can even see some of your lectures or whatever?
I mean, I'm on Facebook, but I'm starting. At some point, I've got to separate my personal profile from my general public profile, because they're all mixed up now, and it just gets nuts.
And there is also, I know it's been a while since it's been updated, but I know you do have alienlegion.com for anyone who does want to see more about that. And well, thank you very much for being on. We will let you go and go lecture or whatever else you're
today it's house repairs.
Oh, fun. Those are great.
Have fun.
Yeah, especially when the high today is going to be like 45, I think.
Oh,
Balmy.
Nice.
Thanks for joining us.
It's my pleasure, guys. Take care.
Yeah. See ya.